It is a real pleasure to be with you to talk about something which is not a subject for a preaching. So I'm not going to preach anything at this time. We are going to deal with a question. Is the church manual gender inclusive about church elders? The first time I heard this question, somebody asked me right after the San Antonio meeting of the General Conference session. And then a few times afterward, the same question came up. Particularly because I worked with the church manual for 10 years. The way it is set up, the work of the church manual at the General Conference, is very important to understand, to answer this question. There are several standing committees at the General Conference. One of them is the Church Manual Committee. And normally, the Church Manual has a chair, which is usually one of the General Vice Presidents of the General Conference. And then the whole work of the Church Manual is under the administration of one of the secretaries, who is the secretary of the committee. And at that time, only the editing and the publishing of the book was under the Review and Herald. The rest of the work was under the Secretariat. When I was elected secretary, the then secretary of the General Conference, elected at the same time, re-elected, I should say, took me to his office and explained to me what was the different works of my office. And he told me that the church manual was to be one of them. So I began to read and to see what has been done, the procedure, how this work, because normally we look from outside and see just things in bulk, not in detail. And at that moment, I needed the details. And the Church Manual Committee is made up of very many members, the most important ones that work in different areas of the General Conference, and members of divisions. Normally, the members of division works only when the session is actually in place. So I had to receive all the items for the agenda and prepare the agenda. Items would come from divisions, from the president of the General Conference, from ADCAM, which is the administrative committee of the General Conference, from the president of the Church Manual Committee, and I will receive all those items for discussion at the Church Manual and gather all the information related to every item that comes in. Then when there would be enough material, I would go to the chairperson, talk to him about every item. We discussed the content, and then it was set up a date for the committee to meet. When the committee met, and this is normal procedure still going on at the GC, then we discuss freely with all the members. Normally, it takes a while to come to a conclusion and to a recommendation. That recommendation would go to outcome for consideration. Then from whatever is approved at the outcome goes to the annual council, into the agenda of the annual council, and again, a fresh new discussion is in place. Now with all members, representatives from the world, unions, divisions, institutions, many others. At that time, a decision is made to put the item into the agenda of the session, next session. And then the items go to the session, and whatever is approved by the session goes to the church manual. You can see that it is a very long process. Normally, items that come from the divisions have been discussed either by a conference committee, a union committee, certainly by the division committee. It all depends on where the item begins. So many committees on the process. I'm telling this only for you to have an idea that it is not easy to incorporate any item into the church manual. It is very difficult, really. And the secretary then has to take care of all the rest of the process once the GC committee session, the GC session approves an item. As I told you at the beginning, at that time, the Pacific Press would receive the material, and the Review and Herald, sorry. The Review and Herald received the material and approved by the session, then went to the editors. One of the editors was assigned for this job, and he would prepare everything for printing. This was going on all through the time that this church manual has been published. Now the same manual says about the changes in the content of the manual, something which I want to read directly from the book. It is there since 1946, this decision. It says, all changes or revisions of policy that are to be made in the manual shall be authorized by the General Conference session. You can see no one participating in all this process I described to you has the power to make any change, not even adding a comma. It has to go to the session, and according to the church manual itself, this is how it should be done. And it is done that way. In the year 2000, there was a rather important change. The content of the church manual was divided in two sections. One, it is the main content, and the second one are notes, explanatory in nature. These notes would explain what the content actually means. Or it may be something related to the main content, but that has some particular nuance to be applied in one place or another. Then the note would say that. This is rather new in the history of the church manual, but it has been working since the year 2000. Changes in or revisions of the church manual, the notes accepted, can be made only by action of a general conference session in which delegates of the world body of believers are assembled and have a voice in making revision. This is what it was decided when this change was put in place, but by an action of the GC session. So still the main content was kept the same way. In chapter 1 of the church manual, talking about authority, it is also a definition of the authority of the General Conference in session, just to corroborate the fact that only changes can be done by the GC session. And the church manual, quoting a reference from Ellen G. White, said the following: the content of the church manual is the expression of Seventh-day Adventist Church's understanding of Christian life and church governance and discipline based on biblical principles. It expresses the authority of a duly assembled General Conference session. And then the quotation from Ellen G. White: God has ordained that the representatives of his church from all parts of the earth, when assembled in General Conference, shall have authority. This is also related to the way the church manual has whatever it has, and the session, why only can be changed anything in the church manual based on a GC session action. The basis for this understanding comes first from the Bible. It has to be that way. And in the Bible, we quote Acts 20, 17 to 28, Hebrews 13, 17, and 1 Peter 5, 1 to 3. And also based on Ellen G. White's revelation. You see, we have to take first the Bible, then the spirit of prophecy, in that order of importance, knowing that we should not go in a direction contrary to the Bible, neither contrary to the spirit of prophecy. So it has to be a harmony between these two. It is not just a church manual open for whatever the church would like to. It is the voice of the church, and it is the authority of the church, but not outside of the authority of the Bible, neither the authority of the spirit of prophecy. That's why all this process has to be very carefully followed. It's amazing. Because this is a procedure that has been in place since the beginning of the church manual, and it has all the time been followed very, very faithfully. Sometimes I hear criticism toward the General Conference administration. I worked there for 10 years. And let me tell you, I'm not trying to convince anybody nor contradict anybody. I'm just telling facts. I never had an experience with somebody who was trying to avoid authorities in this process. Yes, sometimes tension comes up because there are some who think one way, other people who think different way, and there is diversity of opinion, yes. But that is not a problem as long as we are all committed to one principle, and that is to follow the Bible. Differences of opinion are not really a difficulty or a problem, and should not ever create any kind of contention. Discussion like Acts 15, yes, strong discussion, but all coming together, and then we go about this consensus. And to get the consensus of the whole church is a long process, but it is possible. And we have been experiencing that with the church manual all through every item that goes to the church manual. We may ask, has this been always faithfully respected by the GC? The answer, naturally, is yes. Another question may come, has the General Conference taken license to abbreviate the process via editing or another way to introduce changes in the church manual in the past, at least once in history? To my knowledge, the answer would be no. And I'm going to confirm this with the only time when something came in the church manual that was not the will of the people. Actually, there was not something that was introduced, but it was something that was left out. And this, when I got to the GC in 1990, the volume of that session was already in the process and printed. A year later, you see, when you have something that is under your responsibility, you keep in tune with that all the time. And it came to my knowledge that there were items approved in the 1885 General Conference session that were not incorporated in the 1990 edition of the Church Manual after the 1990 session. I gathered all the information, went to the Church Manual, because you have to follow the process. And it reported to the Church Manual what happened. We have an edition of the Church Manual that is not faithful to the actions of the GC session. This is very unusual, irregular. It is not acceptable. Well, the decision of the Church Manual Committee was to report to Eccl GC Administration Committee. And that one is made up by Treasury, Presidency, Treasury, Secretariat. If I follow the order of importance in the administration, it should be Presidential, Secretariat, and Treasury. At that moment, there were 6 working at Presidential, Vice Presidents, and 6 working in Secretariat, and 6 working in Treasury. This is the administration of the GC. And then in the ADCOM, or Administrative Committee, also you have a few representatives from departments. DRI and a few others, and that is the Administrative Committee. When this committee discussed the issue, they all came to consensus, total consensus. No, we have to stop the edition of this church manual. And we came to the conclusion that the 1990 edition of the church manual has to be retrieved and to be destroyed and to be replaced by a new complete edition. But doing that with just a decision from this committee, ADCOM, would look a little bit like trying to hide something, which we cannot do at that level of the church. So we took it to the annual council, where everybody was present, and I reported the situation and gave the parts missing. All the information was in their hands. So the annual council of 1990, that is October, a decision was made, and I have the complete copy of the decision to read to you, for you to have a clear idea how the mind of the members of these committees works. The action says, Mario Veloso presented the document showing items voted mainly by the 1985 General Conference session, which do not appear in the 1990 edition of the Church Manual. It was voted. 1. To officially inform the World Church by way of the Annual Council that certain items previously voted by a General Conference session were for inclusion in the Church Manual are missing from the current 1990 edition due to technical errors. I'm going to explain a little bit that. 2, to provide divisions with the corrected material to enable them to incorporate the corrections in their printings of the Church Manual. 3, to place the corrections in all future printing of the 1990 Church Manual. Okay, it is quite clear the decision for the whole church. Now, these technical errors. As I told you, the Church Manual was under the editing and printing responsibilities of the Review and Herald. When this came back to ADCOM again, one of the actions that ADCOM immediately took was to take the church manual from the hands of the Review and Herald and place it entirely in the hands of Secretariat. From there on, whatever it was going to be the church manual would come from Secretary, ready to be printed. Only printing was in the hands of the Review or wherever Secretariat would like to print it, if there would come any difficulty. You can see that this is taken very seriously. There was one mistake. I would not say it was intentionally done. That's why we say due to technical problems. Not to get involved in any investigation of the matter. It was what was the intention, why this happened. It was easy, no discussion on that point, and the whole responsibility was taken from the Review. Now the church manual is actually done, the proof reading of the material to be printed. Everything is done in Secretariat. Because, you see, you have somebody there that has a responsibility, one of the secretaries, and you can call attention to that person and actually make that person responsible for whatever happened. Otherwise, it was very difficult to make anybody responsible. So this is what happened at that time. But you see, once the action was taken at the annual council, we knew what needed to do. It came back, as I said, to outcome again. This action about who was going to be responsible for editing and printing was taken, and then we made two other actions. One was to recall everything back, and the other one was to finance the new edition. And the GC financed the whole thing because we didn't want that anybody, for lack of money, to save the replacement of the book. Sometimes it's real lack of money, and sometimes it might be just a choice. But anyway, it was done by the GC, with the funds of the GC, with the supervision of the GC, everything for the whole thing to be replaced. And actually the mistake to be corrected fully. This was all done in unanimity. I mean, the mind of those who work at the GC and the mind of those who were in the annual council, they were all one mind. And this is the way the church manual material is being handled all the time. And I would say not only the church manual. The GC actually is very careful on everything that it is done there. Whatever goes to the church manual or goes to the policy book, the procedure is very similar. The only thing different is some items that go to the working policy don't need a GC session. But most of the material that is in the working policy goes the same procedure as the church manual with an action of the GC session. So these documents are very seriously taken. Sometimes when somebody quotes to me a book saying, but so-and-so teaches this, and this is a teaching of the church, I would say no. Nobody's book is the teaching of the church, even if it is all correct. It is not the teaching of the church. The only documents which are officially the voice of the GC are 4 documents. These are the only ones. One, the Bible. This is official teaching of the Seventh-day Adventist Church from Genesis 1:1 to Revelation, the last verse. Second, the writing of Ellen G. White. This is official teaching of the Seventh-day Adventist Church too. Second, the church manual. Third, the church manual. This is the official voice of the GC because it is based on an action of the GC session. And then the working policy. Whatever it is in these books, this is officially coming from the GC. Anything else is the opinion of the author. When we talk about the Bible, the author is God, not the biblical writers. They are not the authors of the Bible. And we should never quote Paul saying, author of Romans. He's the writer of Romans, not the author. And the same way, all through the Bible and the spirit of prophecy, the same thing. Another point that we should never stop emphasizing is the inspiration is actually happening not in words or structures, literary structures. It is in the actual teaching content of the Bible. That's what God is revealing. Because the words and the structures belong to the writer, whoever is an apostle or a prophet. But God, through the Holy Spirit, is saving the reliance and the truthfulness of the content. That's why whenever I hear anybody in any committee or in any book working on the structure or words, finding one word which is also in that place, let's say New Testament and Old Testament, and they put together and they make to say in the Old Testament whatever is related to that word in the New, or vice versa, that is not a biblical good scholarship. That might be a scholarship of critical method based, but not biblically based. We go comparing contents. If Paul says something about the new birth and is quoting the Old Testament about the new birth, then we are talking about the same thing. Or if we say there is one word which is applied to the Levites to take care of the sanctuary in the Old Testament, and we say the same word was in Genesis to refer to taking care of the trees and the garden, well, and come to the conclusion that since that word referred to the priesthood, then we would say it must mean that in the reference to the Garden of Eden, the garden should be taken into as a temple. I'm going to say an example a little bit too harsh, but what if in the prodigal son work would say that he was put to take care of the pigs with the same word that in Genesis Adam and Eve are taking care of the Garden of Eden? Would we conclude that the Garden of Eden is a place for pigs? No, because it is not a word that makes a difference or a similitude with another context. It is the content, the teaching, the ideas, the concepts. And we have to take care of that very carefully. Most of the scholarly work done in this, at these times, is done through the connections of words and structures. And we develop a whole hermeneutical base on these principles, which are putting us only to work with the human side of the Bible. And it is, to my understanding, very, very coherent, because since this method is human and the material with the method is working is human, then they are on one level, the human level of the scriptures. They are not getting into the divine revealed content of the scriptures. So it looks like very scientific, that way of working with the scriptures, but actually it is not. I got my doctoral degree from a Catholic university, and I had to struggle with this situation. Then I went with my professor, the one who was leading me in the dissertation once, and we discussed a whole afternoon. After lunch, we got together and we spent the whole half a day talking about the methodology that we were going to follow in this dissertation. And I said simply, I'm going to work with the Revelation, and my work was on the Gospel of John. I'm going to work with God's revelation in John, which means unexplained. The whole explanation that we find in Introduction to the Great Controversy. I didn't need to quote the reference, not telling him that it was our prophetess, nothing of that, but explain very clearly what was my understanding of Revelation. And after several ideas that we discussed, he said, it's okay, it makes sense. But you have to be consistent, he told me. And to be consistent, you will have to abandon entirely the historical critical method. He saw it clearly. But for him, it was indifferent. One method or the other, it was the same for him. So you have to be consistent, he said, because a doctoral dissertation without consistency gets into trouble. Okay, now he was forcing me to be consistent with this kind of hermeneutical principles. And that is a serious work in whatever is done in the biblical investigation or research. And this is the way we should be dealing with. So, the church manual is very consistent with these principles, and actually is very consistent with the way that is being established for the content of the church manual to be always in harmony with the understanding of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, expressed by a GC session where actually the people who has the real power in the Seventh-day Adventist Church are working together. We may have some power struggles in the church once in a while. This has been more than one time in our history. But you see, if we allow the real power of the church to make decisions, that is the people, then we wouldn't have much deviations from the authority of the scriptures. Because normally the majority of the people in this church, at least in this Seventh-day Adventist Church, has very clear understanding about where the real authority is. The people, they are not deceived. If we find whatever thing that is not in harmony with our own understanding, and we fight on that level, let's go to the people. And let's accept what the people decide. It is not just for a chance that God decided to tell us that the authority is in the GC session, not on the leadership of the church, but in the GC session, which is the people. God knows better than we. And he knows that political interests or other kinds of motivations normally are very far away from the people. So if we trust the people of God, it will come out everything very well. Then you see, this is a very strong assurance that in the church manual there is only one content, and that is the biblical content, those principles who are in harmony with the Ellen G. White, which are in harmony with the Bible, which are in harmony with the will of the people. Now, we have not yet come to tell you whether there is gender inclusiveness in the church related to elders. But this is going to, in this context I described, is going to be very clear. On July 10, 1990, the same GC session of the 55th constituency meeting just referred to, held at the Indianapolis, Indiana, took the following rather simple directive. Voted to authorize the Church Manual Committee to use inclusive language in all gender references where appropriate. Now, we have a directive to the Church Manual, not to everybody, not to any committee of any level of the church administration, not to any publisher, to the Church Manual Committee, To do what? To actualize all references which are appropriate to expressed in gender-inclusive language. Let's say we are talking about the election of the Sabbath school principal. There you can have inclusive language, no difference, and many other places. So this directive was very clear with two limitations. One is only the Church Manual Committee that is going to do that, and the other one is where appropriate, where the content is appropriate to include both genders. Where it is the intent of the content to separate between the genders, you cannot touch it. This was not an open action, and some people sometimes quote this action to say, no, we are authorized now to have the use of inclusive language in the church manual. Not in every place. Okay, there is one more point that I need to clarify because this is very important. In July 12, 1990, the same session, there was a discussion on ordination of women, pastors. Next day, the 12th, at 2 p.m., the session, Calvin Rock was the chair of the session, and he opened for discussion an item that was in the agenda of the church manual. Many people were out of the meeting. Many. I mean, it was very scarce, the presence of the delegate. I was there because when I am in those kind of meetings, I don't lose any minute of any meeting. Even now that I have no responsibility myself. Because if you are a delegate, that is your work. And it is your responsibility to be on guard in the watchtower. Always. Always. You never know what may happen. And it did happen. They opened the session. The item was the authorization of elders to marry in the marriage ceremony. And it was an item, and I know it was, and all the delegates should know what is coming because that is published beforehand. That had a little bit of a change with not a direct language expressed, a little bit of a trick. And you have to watch for any trick when it is there. I'm going to read you how the change was worded. In the marriage ceremony, the church, vows, and declaration of marriage are given only by an ordained minister. And now comes the change. Except in those areas where division committees have taken action to approve that selected licensed or commissioned minister who have been ordained as local elders may perform the marriage ceremony. This was introduced. It is not a clear-cut understanding because the minister, the selected licensed and commissioned ministers, this was clearly in harmony with the church manual and with whatever it was in the working policy about licensed ministers, because that sentence was never found in the church manual in any other place. So in the church manual, that expression didn't mean anything. But about the licensed ministers, yes, there is explanation. And in the church manual, there is a definition of the licensed ministers. In that definition, which is still there, it says, by the way, licensed ministers, according to the church manual, is reserved, quote, to give young men an opportunity to demonstrate their call to the ministry, especially in the area of soul winning. Prospective candidates are granted ministerial licenses by the conference mission field. You see, this, it says young men. That's right. No confusion. But in the other side, the commission minister seems to be related to women. And that was a little tiny trick, because in the church manual doesn't mean anything. And why selected credential ministers? Why? Because not all of them received. When you are in the field and you have a young man coming from the seminary, and you put him as a licensed minister in a church, he cannot do anything that the pastor does unless that man is actually elected elder of that church. That is the selected, because you may be a young man working under an ordained minister, never becoming an elder of the church, just the assistant of the minister. And the other one who goes into a faraway field where there is no senior pastor, or no other pastor for that matter, then he might be ordained elder of the church. He is authorized to do this. Many think that day women elders were ordered or accepted or approved. No, they were not. The best proof is that there is no gender inclusive in the church manual about elders. Not before, not after this action. Still we are the same. Then how come that in some divisions we have women elders and in others we don't? This is based on two actions taken by the executive committee of the GC. One in 1975, which was Spring Council, and the other one, 1984 Annual Council. There is a big difference between Spring Council, because in Spring Council you don't have large delegation representing the world, mainly North America. That's why they took it to an annual council. And the action was, the content of the action is this. One, to reaffirm the spring meeting action of 1975. Two, to advise each division that it is free to make provision as it may deem necessary for the election and ordination of women in local churches, elders. 3, to suggest guidelines for the selection and ordination of women as church elders. And here are the guidelines. A, the concept should first be accepted at the local church. It should begin in the local church. B, if the church plans to implement the concept, it should look for advice from the local conference committee. Advice. This is the role of the local conference committee, an advising role, not a decision role, not a promotion role, not imposing the churches to follow this ordination of women elders. C, the vote must not be taken by the local church unless a clear consensus exists in the church that women elders are desired and essential for spiritual well-being of the local church. D, a clear majority of the total voting members of the church should be in favor. And listen to this clarification. Not only the majority of the few in attendance at a business meeting, but the majority that has the right to vote. That is all members. E, the decision rendered should unify the members, not become the cause of divisiveness and alienation. You can see that the spirit of this action is not followed by those who are ordaining local elders. I have not noticed that in some places the organization, being the conference or the union, are forcing this into churches that they don't want to have women elders. Okay, this has generated two reactions from divisions. One, there are divisions who accept it and implement and force it. Others do not accept, they don't ordain, and they have two reasons. One, no biblical base. Second, no finalized process in the church. It never was taken to a session. You cannot change anything in the church manual unless it is by a GC session. This item never went to a session. So, at the most, it is a motion in process. And I'm sure that no one is pushing to take it to the session because the session is going to deny it. You may be quite sure that this would be the end of this procedure if it is taken to the session. But one of these days, it will have to go. Or to the session, or out of practice. Because the church manual has no distinction of gender in, I should say, it has very clear distinction of genders related to the election of elders. No inclusive language related to elders, only for men.
I want to take this opportunity to thank everyone who is tuned in to this special symposium on Scripture, church structure, and the path to unity. We really do appreciate you tuning in. We also appreciate the questions that have come in for our panel discussion. I would like to take this opportunity to share with you some valuable materials that we carry here at Secrets Unsealed. If we don't carry them, I will mention it to you. You'll have to get them some other places. But I'd like to share with you some of the materials that we have available, as well as materials that I have written and prepared through the course of many years of this discussion. First of all, I would like to mention the book, The Tip of an Iceberg. This book was written by C. Raymond Holmes, a good friend. If there is one book that I would recommend everyone to read above all other books, it would be this one. Even though it was written in 1994, it is so clear on the issues, particularly the issue of hermeneutics, or how we interpret the Bible. Way back there, 23 years ago, Dr. Holmes discerned all of the deep issues that are facing the church today. This book is presently out of print, but Secrets Unsealed is negotiating to reprint this book and make it available. So stay tuned about this book. Once again, The Tip of an Iceberg by C. Raymond Holmes. Then, I believe it was in 1999 that the Andrews University Theological Seminary published the book Women in Ministry. And of course, the seminary at that time strongly supported the idea of ordaining women to the gospel ministry. So in the year 2000, there was a book published in response by several scholars of the Adventist Church who were opposed to women's ordination. The name of this book is Prove All Things. It's edited by Mercedes Dyer, who was my teacher when I was at the seminary, a very fine woman. But it is a book that contains a symposium of many different authors concerning this issue of women's ordination. It answers many of the arguments of the pro-ordination group. Then I want to recommend a book that is written by a non-Adventist. I don't recommend many books that are written by non-Adventists, but this is a good book. We don't necessarily agree with every detail of it, but the preponderance of the evidence is very, very good. The name of the book is Evangelical Feminism, A New Path to Liberalism. It's written by Wayne Grudem, who is a Reformed scholar. Now, there's been a lot of criticism against the idea of using Wayne Grudem and his arguments. But I believe that many of his arguments are rock solid, and in this book he answers many of the arguments that are used by the pro-ordination group. Then I have a book that I wrote way back in 2012, leading up to the special constituency of the Pacific Union, where the Pacific Union attempted to change its constitution to allow for women's ordination. And when the Union was not able to change the Constitution, they approved women's ordination anyway. I wrote a little book leading up to this event called Reflections on Women's Ordination. It speaks about the conflict that arose around the year 2012 over the issue of women's ordination. That's where the hornet's nest began to cause problems in the church. And then we have the same book in Spanish, La Ordenación de la Mujer, Sí o No. So this same book is available in Spanish. Then we have a book that was written by Eugene Pruitt while we were at TOSC, the Theology of Ordination Study Committee. Women's Ordination, 31 Popular Arguments and Biblical Answers. Very good resource book that answers many of the points that are brought up by those who favor women's ordination. Then probably many of you know that Secrets Unsealed, leading up to the General Conference session, actually sponsored 2 symposiums here in our studio. The first one was in English, and the title of it was Women's Ordination, History, Issues, and Implications. We had several scholars that we brought in and pastors, and they presented on different aspects of this particular subject. This series is available from Secrets Unsealed for the cost of shipping. Once again, the title is Women's Ordination, History, Issues, and Implications. This series is available on DVD. Then there are several newsletter articles that I wrote leading up to the vote at the General Conference session in 2015. The first of these is Reflections on Phoebe. It's claimed that Phoebe was a deacon of the church. And I go through a careful study of her mention in Romans chapter 16, and I show that she was a servant in the church. She was not a deacon, a full-fledged deacon like the deacons in the church today. Then many have argued that because Deborah and Huldah were notable women in the Old Testament that played a very important role in the history of Israel, and we would not argue that point, I decided to write an article titled Reflections on Deborah and Huldah. These two notable women from the Old Testament that made a big difference in the history of Israel. Of course, their prominence in the Old Testament is used by those who favor women's ordination to say that we should ordain women to the gospel ministry. Then I have an article that I wrote, Reflections on Junia, Fact or Conjecture. And basically what I do in this particular article is show that Junia was not an apostle. She was a notable person known by the apostles, but she was not an apostle. Then also we have an article that was prepared by several of us who belonged to the Theology of Ordination Study Committee. Task Group number 1 reviews the third option. Basically, at first, at the Theology of Ordination Study Committee, there were only two groups, those who favored and those who were against. But towards the end of the meetings, a third option appeared, and here in this article we deal with the third option. Then I wrote an article for our newsletter, Reflections on Hermeneutics, because this is really the central issue in this whole discussion, is how you interpret the Bible. And so I wrote an article bringing out the issues concerning hermeneutics as it relates to women's ordination. Then there's a sermon that I preached at GYC a couple of years ago, and it's related to this. It's called The Risk of Eternal Loss. It's available on YouTube. That's the name of the sermon if you want to watch it. And I also wrote a newsletter article titled The Risk of Eternal Loss. These are some of the newsletter articles that I wrote concerning the issue of women's ordination. Then we have the book, The Adventist Ordination Crisis, which was published by Amazing Facts, but many of those of us who belonged to TASC actually contributed to the arguments that are used in this book. Finally, two resources that I would like to mention. First of all, and this is extremely important, I would recommend people to read this because it basically covers the entire trajectory of the women's ordination discussion from 1968 through immediately after the General Conference session in 2015. The title is Reflections on San Antonio. This is an extremely important article because it shows the different strategies and political moves that were made to attempt to approve the ordination of women to the gospel ministry. I would highly recommend that you read this rather long article in this newsletter. Finally, this is not in a booklet, but it's an article that I wrote, and the title of it is Biblical and Spirit of Prophecy Evidence for Male Headship. It's a good number of pages. Actually, it's 33 pages. One of the big issues that is being discussed is whether the Bible teaches male headship. And I believe that this document proves beyond a shadow of doubt that headship not only exists after sin, but headship existed in the Garden of Eden before sin. The idea of headship goes all the way back to eternity past. And so these are some of the resources that are available from Secrets Unsealed. Now you probably are wondering how you can get the newsletter articles, for example, that I have mentioned. Basically, all you have to do is click on Resources. Go to secretsunsealed.org, our website, click on Resources, and then go down to where it says Newsletter Articles. And you click there and you'll find all of the articles that are in our newsletters, not only on women's ordination, but also on other issues. I would like to just mention in closing that if you want this article on headship, that also is available there on our website, secretsunsealed.org. We carry all of these materials with the exception of the book Evangelical Feminism by Wayne Grudem. You would have to get that online or get it at an evangelical bookstore. However, all of the other resources are available from Secrets Unsealed. So I hope that you will check out these resources, these materials. I believe they're clear that even though women are extremely important in the church, God has given them functions that even men cannot fulfill. They have not been called to be ordained as ministers of the gospel in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. It doesn't mean that women are inferior. Far be the thought from our minds that women are inferior to men. They are equal to men, but they have different functions that God has given them. So may God bless you all. And I trust that this town hall meeting, as well as the individual presentations, have been a blessing to your life. May God bless you and keep you in His care. And may God bless His church and bring unity where there is now division. Blessings to you all.